Welcome.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Sorry about that confusion.
Okay, so let me start by just beginning the debate. This is a series of debates that we're doing at Schneps Media, PoliticsNY, where we're taking a look at the candidates for state senate and, of course, in the congressional races for the August 23rd primary. A very strange and probably hot primary, but we're doing it thanks to all of that redistricting, which, by the way, means we're going to be focusing tonight on District 26. I'm Jane Hanson with Steve Witt, and Steve and I are co-moderating this, and he has also got the additional duty of being the timekeeper. So when you see him wave once, that means you're close to your time. When you see him wave twice, it means stop talking. Very simple. And the rules of engagement for this evening are that we are going to have a 2-minute opening statement from each of you. We will then ask questions. You have a minute to respond to the questions. And if you want to say something on the, to whatever the other candidate has said, please feel free. You'll have 30 seconds to do that. And we will have a little time you can ask each other a question if we have time for it. And then we'll have the closing statements and we'll be done. But we want this to be interesting for the viewers and to give them a lot of background about, who and what you are. So getting to my notes now, since this is District 26, which the incumbent is Andrew Gounardes. Am I saying your name correctly?
Gounardes.
Gounardes, who, by the way, was the incumbent in District 22, but thanks to redistricting, you are now the incumbent here. The district includes Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights, Sunset Park, Park Slope, Gowanus, Red Hook, Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn Heights, and Dumbo, which of course was my old stomping ground. And he's being opposed by David Yassky. And I'm sure you probably remember his name very well from all of his years serving on the city council. He's also worked with former Mayor Bloomberg. He's done just public service has been his life. And it's good to see him again. It's been a while, but welcome to both of you. So let's begin with our opening statements. And David, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you to Schneps Media for hosting. Jane Hanson, Steve Witt, thank you for moderating. And most of all, thank you to folks tuning in and giving your time to this. It's a very important election. And as Jane said, because the state legislature kind of messed up the redistricting, we have a very, unusual calendar. A lot of people don't even realize. So I'm especially glad you're holding this debate to make sure people know elections coming up. It's important. Go vote. Let me introduce myself. I've been fighting for working families in Brooklyn for most of the last 3 decades, starting with time working for Chuck Schumer, helping pass the Brady Law, writing the assault weapons ban to reduce gun violence, then in the city council. Many of you I'm sure I represented, since I represented a big chunk of this district for years in the city council. And my team and I notched important accomplishments on jobs, on climate, on bike commuting, on junk food in schools, on affordable housing, enabling thousands of struggling families to stay in Brooklyn. And in the neighborhoods, getting rid of dozens of transfer stations, helping get Brooklyn Bridge Park started, and the accomplishment I may be most proud of, turning around PS8 from a half-empty failing school to a thriving school that's a cornerstone in the neighborhood. So I am coming to voters to say, I got results then, I've gotten results throughout my career, and I will deliver for you now. I'm running for this district because we face big challenges. The neighborhoods here, okay, the neighborhoods have from the Brooklyn Heights and Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, where the BQE reconstruction poses maybe the biggest challenge since the BQE itself was started or was built. Flooding in Red Hook, okay, that's the second one. I'll say more later. Thank you.
Andrew.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your patience in us getting started this evening. I'm State Senator Andrew Gounardes, and I'm really glad to be here with you all today. I am running for re-election in the newly drawn 26th Senate District because I know what it takes to serve Brooklyn. I've been doing it almost my entire professional career. I was first elected to the state Senate in 2018, defeating the last Republican state senator in Brooklyn. And in that time, I've had more than 60 of my bills signed into law by both governors. Some of the work that we've done in Albany over the last 4 years include passing the Reproductive Health Act so that we can actually codify Roe versus Wade here in New York State. We passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is the most advanced and ambitious climate change legislation anywhere in the world behind the Paris Accords. We've passed landmark gun legislation and so much more. But a little bit about me, because these district lines have changed a little bit. I'm born and raised in Bay Ridge. I spent almost my entire life living here. My mother was a public school educator. My father, a local small business owner. He had a small dental practice in the neighborhood. I went to public schools and I went to Hunter College afterwards. My wife and I are raising our son, Evan, in this same community. I'm running to represent the district where I've always lived my entire life. And I have a record of results that knows how to deliver for Brooklyn. I know what it takes to fight. I know what it takes to work hard to pass groundbreaking legislation that's going to make a difference in people's lives and make sure that we have a Brooklyn and a New York City that is fair, safe, affordable, and gives everybody an opportunity to thrive. That's why I'm so proud to have the endorsement of the Working Families Party, of Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, of City Comptroller Brad Lander, of Councilmember Lincoln Ressler and Councilmember Justin Brennan, and so many others, including the New York State AFL-CIO, 1199 SCIU, the communication workers, the teachers, the nurses, the transit workers, and so many of the other folks that represent working people in and across New York City. If you re-elect me to the state Senate, I'm going to continue to deliver on my record of accomplishment and continue to deliver for Brooklyn. And I look forward to our questions this evening. Thank you.
Right on time. All right, so let's start. You just mentioned keeping the city safe, affordable, good education, all kinds of issues that people are deeply worried about right now. So how do you propose to make the city safer? Crime has gone up, and we all know that something has to be done about it because people are afraid to ride on the subways. They're afraid to walk down the street. Tourists are afraid to come visit. What are you going to do about it? Let's start with you, Andrew.
Great. Well, it's a really important question and one that I'm really eager to get into. We know that actually across the country, there is an uptick in crime all across this country. A lot of it has to do with the pandemic and the trauma that we've just come out of. And so we have to look at some of these root causes and figure out what we can do to tackle the crime crisis. And a couple of things that you mentioned, people fear safety. They fear about taking the subways. There's so much we can do to change that perception and change that narrative. One of the things we did earlier this year, we passed landmark gun legislation that helps make it harder for folks to carry concealed carry permits so we can get guns off of our street. We strengthen our safe storage laws. We strengthen the process by which individuals can file for emergency risk order protection laws to get guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves or to others. We also have to look at what's happening in our court system. Right now, 50% of cases where people are arrested and then rearrested, judges have the discretion to hold individuals, and they're not doing it. Our judges are not even following the laws that we passed, and that is a huge problem that is contributing to our public safety concerns. We have to make sure that we are holding our judiciary accountable so that they are following the laws that we passed to keep people safe. And then as it relates to the subway, best way to make people feel safe on the subway is to have a reliable and accessible subway system that works for everybody. People shouldn't have to wait 15 minutes on a subway platform just to get a train. There should be subways every 5 minutes, every 6 minutes. We should have fully lit subway platforms. We should have intervention crisis teams on subway platforms to deliver to people and connect with people directly. And that's how we're going to help change this conversation and keep New Yorkers safe.
All right. When I heard you talk about the court system, I immediately went to bail reform. But first, I want to give David a chance to answer the question.
Yeah, thank you. And first, Jane, I just want to note, when you referred to Andrew as incumbent, he is the incumbent in 20% of this district. He represents about 20% of it now. The other 80% is new to him. I'm sorry, but I don't think changing the perception is really a great answer. That's a classic Albany politician answer for you. How about let's change the reality? And the problem is that the state legislature bears some of the responsibility for the uptick in uptick. But it's not perception. Shootings are much higher than they were for decades. Other crimes are higher. I don't think we can tell somebody who is sexually assaulted in the Carroll Street subway stop, oh, let's change the perception of crime. I don't think we can tell the store owners who have been burglarized on Atlantic Avenue, on 4th Avenue in Bay Ridge, so let's just change the perception of crime. We need to change the reality of it. Part of that is to give the judges the discretion that Andrew seems to say they have, but that the bail law took away from them. Discretion to detain if necessary, if there's a finding of a threat to public safety. Discretion to say, okay, you are going to be released, but only if you are going to substance abuse treatment, only if you're going to your mental health counseling. That is how judges were handling people who posed a risk prior to the state legislature changing it.
So bail reform, let's go right.
Can we comment on that or
respond? Yes, 30
well,
seconds.
I was going to say just a couple of, clarifications here. Look, David's a smart guy. He went to Ivy League schools. He's not a dummy. He knows the truth here. He knows that judges were granted discretion in 2020 and then again in 2021. He already knows that. He also already knows that shootings are down.
That's not the case.
David, you know how to read a law. David, don't be dishonest.
Andrew,
don't be dishonest. You're a smart guy, David.
Okay.
You don't be dishonest. Look
Andrew,
at the law that we changed.
That the bail law took entire categories of offenses and made them non-bailable.
David, don't speak over me. I have the floor right now. You can't
let Andrew finish.
Andrew finish, and then we'll get back to you, David.
You can have a chance to respond, but according to the rules of the debate, I have a chance to respond for 30 seconds. You have now taken up a minute and a half of that.
All right, so you get another 20 seconds.
Go for it.
You know that in 2020, we granted judges significant discretion, and they are currently not using it. You also know that this year shootings are down 13% relative to last year, and shootings are not at their highest level in decades. We have an uptick in shootings. Everyone acknowledges that, but this year they're down 13% over last year. So if we're going to have a conversation about public safety, let's talk about the facts. Let's talk about the real data. Let's talk about what's really happening. Let's not make things up.
Okay.
Let's not mislead the public because the public is smarter than that. And you're smarter than that.
All right.
You know better.
Andrew gave the rebuttal. Very good.
So continue on, David. We're talking about bail reform. I want to know what you feel should be done.
Well, the answer is that despite what Andrew says, judges have discretion for some offenses to set bail. For many offenses, they have no discretion. And they don't have the discretion to do what they have been doing successfully for years, which is say you are someone who's been arrested can be on release as long as they meet conditions. They go to substance abuse treatment. They go to their mental health counseling. They go to anger management. That's what enabled this. That's part of what enabled the city to keep crime down, for decades. And I'm glad that it's now dropped comparative to last year. It's still much higher than it was pre-pandemic, and Andrew knows that. So that's, by the way, that's just part of it. The other part is we have to deal with the mental health crisis in this city and in the state. And again, when the legislature passed bail reform, does that mean stop, Steve? No, I give people
finish your thoughts.
Okay, I give them credit for the impulse, but they only did half of it, and they didn't put in place any mechanisms to help the mentally ill folks who genuinely do need supervision.
So let's talk about that, because mental health is at the core of a lot of this, and we know it. And in particular, the shootings that have occurred around the country, up in Buffalo, there was a shooting on the New York City subway not that long ago. I don't remember all of the details of it, but the bottom line is there are too many times that people who have guns have some sort of a mental health issue, and despite laws, they're still able to get guns. And so the gun laws don't seem to be working. So what else are we going to do about mental health to be sure that people who have issues don't get guns in their hands? Andrew?
Well, I think that's a great question. Part of the problem is we have really great laws on the books, but the people in charge of enforcing those laws have not been enforcing those laws. And we saw that so clearly in the case of the Buffalo shooting, where this individual was flagged not be able to purchase a gun, And yet the system failed because the people implementing that law, the red flag law, failed to implement it and execute it properly. So let's talk about a bigger picture here, which is the mental health crisis. For the last decade, Albany had defunded our ability to service individuals with mental illness and mental health challenges.
Has it
under former
defunded
Governor,
them while
I'm
you've
sorry?
been in office? Has it defunded them while you've been in office?
Starting with Governor Cuomo when he took office, they changed the way that they funded mental health crisis intervention in this state, and we cut about 2,000 beds. Before I got to Albany, this is what the reality that we faced. We lost about 2,000 beds across the state, and those are resources that used to exist to be able to house people, take care of people, stabilize people. Once I got to Albany, we had been fighting tooth and nail against the former governor, who David used to work for as his policy advisor, to be able to restore those cuts. And I'm so glad to say that in this year's budget, the first budget where we didn't have former Governor Cuomo, we had Governor Hochul, we were actually able to restore funding for about half of the beds that we lost during the entirety of the Cuomo administration. That is a significant step forward. That is going to help us treat the chronically mentally ill and the severe mentally ill and help get people off the streets. We have to treat people with the illnesses they have. That was not happening for a decade before I got to Albany. It's happening now.
David?
So it's not just about the treatment, but that's a big piece of it. We also have to provide housing, supportive housing for people with mental illness. You know, for too long, we were using Rikers as basically a psychiatric facility, and that was inhumane. And we can't go back to doing that, but we can't just abandon folks to deal with the problems on their own. And we need a massive investment in supportive housing. I've proposed using old office buildings and hotels that are now underused and converting those into supportive housing. One of the items that I proposed, indeed, when I was policy director for the state, was just that. The legislature didn't pass it, but I'm hoping they will again soon. I was proud to work on the red flag law that New York passed that allows law enforcement or school officials or family members to flag that somebody is unstable and they have access to a gun and they shouldn't. Now Congress is taking that law and trying to implement it nationwide. And it failed, it failed to operate as it should in Buffalo. I think that as schools and law enforcement come to understand it, it'll be used effectively.
So let's talk about the schools in Brooklyn. And by the way, I want to say to the people that are watching, because a couple of people have raised their hands, but I have an inability to call on them. Put your questions, if you have them, in the chat, and we can try to get them into this debate. So I just want people to know that they can do that. I want to get to school safety, because obviously that's something that's very important to the people that live in District 26. Their kids going to the public schools, going to any school in Brooklyn, want to know that when they send those kids to school, they're going to be safe. Now, we haven't had a lot of incidents in New York City public schools, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. I want to know what you think we should do. Should we have bigger police presence in the schools? What should we do? David, you first.
Yeah, so I am not a supporter of having NYPD police schools. I think we don't want children to feel like a school is a prison. We don't want it to feel like a frightening place. I think we need to have the Department of Ed have its own schools, as it does, have school security, but not NYPD. And I'm also not a fan of metal detectors that make children who are going to school feel like they're entering some kind of secure location. I do think principals need a lot more authority to suspend students, to order them to detention. It's an old-fashioned concept, detention, but principals now have very little authority to do that. I think we need to give, teachers more control over their own classrooms. And I think those all are a big piece of the school safety. And the last part is mental health. I was dean of Pace Law School, and we found that we had to invest enormously in counseling for our students. They're under a lot of pressure, even before the pandemic, this was. And that's a part of the Department of Ed system that needs also more resources.
Andrew?
I think we should really start answering this question by asking students what they think will make them feel the most safe. And oftentimes their voices get left out of these conversations. If you talk to students, as I have, across my current district, parts of the new district, they'll all say the same thing. They need more resources in their classroom. They need to feel safe going to talk to people about problems that they're having at home. They need the ability to talk to someone that they can trust about whatever's going on in their lives, their stresses, their anxieties, everything. Which is why we need to have a guidance counselor and a social worker in every single school. And that is why
Guidance counselors now? Are there
and
guidance?
social workers. Right now, because of federal funding that came through the CARES Act, DOE does have funding for every elementary school and middle school to have a guidance counselor. But that funding is temporary, and that's no guarantee that those positions will continue afterwards. But there should also be a social worker, dedicated social worker in every school. One of the first bills I introduced, two of the first bills I introduced in Albany when I got there in 2019, was a bill to mandate every single public school to have a guidance counselor, and every single public school to have a social worker, to provide students the resources they need to feel safe and secure and be able to have the school environment they deserve. That's how we're going to keep school communities safe, is by centering the concerns of students, who are the ones that we care the most about, and keeping them safe.
Yeah, I have a question, just philosophically speaking. There's some concern that the Democratic Party is kind of stretching. And I'm wondering, philosophically, do you consider yourself a progressive or a moderate, and why? And, when you look at policy, and we could start with Andrew.
I mean, I've made no surprise, it's no secret of the fact that I consider myself a strongly principled, pragmatic, progressive Democrat. That's how I ran for office in 2018. That's how I won. That's how I've served in my office, in my role for the last 8 years. And that's how I'm running for re-election again to the state Senate. And that's why I have, the endorsements that I do, including from the Working Families Party and a whole slew of local elected officials who believe in that vision.
It seems to be you're more progressive supporters than when you originally started. So I was just curious. So a pragmatic.
Well, it's the same endorsers I've had in all my elections, Steve. I don't have any new arrivals. It's the same coalition that elected me, same labor coalition, same neighborhood coalition, same elected official coalition. I've had the same coalition from day one because they know that I can deliver and that I have delivered, and that's why they're sticking with me.
Gotcha. And David, what do you?
Well, nobody can't argue with the language of strongly principled, pragmatic, progressive. That certainly describes me and describes my whole career. But let's be kind of clear and straightforward about what that means. I maybe agree with Andrew, if this is what he was trying to say, that the far left doesn't own the word progressive. I'm not giving up on that word. I've been a progressive my whole life. When I fought for affordable housing, to force developers to put in affordable housing, that was progressive. When I fought for gun control and got it, that was progressive. When I fought to require all the taxis to be gas electric hybrids to cut down on emissions, that was progressive. Now, it's true that the far left of the party now, including, honestly, Andrew and a lot of his positions, they want to claim that progressive is only for people who hold essentially socialist positions and align themselves with the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm not giving up the word progressive. Traditional Democrats like me and like most of the people in the 26th Senate district are in fact progressive.
Meaning what?
Meaning you believe in government, strong social services to help people in need, to help people get opportunity who otherwise wouldn't have it, to get rid of gender hierarchy or push back against gender and racial hierarchies. But the distinction is that traditional Democratic progressives understand that you also need a healthy private sector, and that without an economy that employs people, you can't do anything else that you want to do. So when Industry City comes along with a plan, you don't say, no, thanks, we don't want jobs. When Amazon comes along, you don't say, no, thanks, we don't want those jobs. And you don't say, we're going to take over the entire medical industry, like, in the bill that Andrew has supported. I think that the difference between the traditional Democrats and today's far left really is about whether you want government to regulate aggressively and protect people who need protected, or whether you want government to run everything, like because they've done such a great job with public housing.
I'd like, Andrew, you have 30 seconds to respond if you'd like.
I mean, where do I begin? Honestly, I mean, come on. I mean, I can't believe that you're going to sit there and defend a failing healthcare system that bankrupts people and forces them to sell cupcakes to pay for their cancer treatments. We all know that healthcare in this state and in this country is fundamentally broken, and that current solutions are absolutely failing to serve people who need it the most. And to say that I'm a socialist, I've never been a member of the Socialist Party. I am not a democratic socialist, and nor have I represented my community in that way. I have always centered the constituents in my district first and foremost, and I have put their needs first, which is why I've been relentlessly fighting to bring resources back to my community for jobs, for housing, for education, for public education, for higher education, and to reform a broken healthcare system. Those are not socialist positions. Those are positions that working people desperately need to be able to afford to stay in New York, because the New York of Andrew Cuomo and Mike Bloomberg is not the New York that people in Brooklyn can afford to live in any longer. That is why I won this seat, and that is why I have the support that I do from people all across the spectrum of the party, because they know that I can deliver on connecting people and centering communities and be able to get them the result that they need to fundamentally change their lives, because the status quo is not working for them. And I also have to say, to bring up Amazon, I have to tout the jobs of Amazon, where they're going to pay $15 an hour in union bus. How can you claim to speak for working people and then support publicly a company that is so anti-union, and they're going to pay people poverty wages? It's mind-boggling that that's a position that a Democrat would take in 2022 in New York City.
So, no, let's be clear about it. I 100% support the unionization efforts at Amazon. And the reason that you can have that unionization effort here is because the jobs are here. If there are no jobs, there's nothing to unionize. So to me, the difference between the traditional progressives and the far left is the traditional progressives say, yes, we need the jobs here. And then we support labor in organizing. We support labor in getting fair wages. We support labor in getting the benefits that they need and the work rules to protect workers. But we want the jobs here in the first place.
But we need the good paying jobs here in the first place.
We need the good paying jobs, of course.
And it's not worth giving away billions in tax expenditures to jobs that are not going to be good paying unionized jobs. And it's not good negotiating with a partner that doesn't want to commit to those things and then takes their marbles and leaves. That's the problem here.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk then about this whole issue of affordability, because here's what is going on. You've got people who can't afford to live in the city any longer, so they're leaving and many of them can't find jobs because a lot of businesses have closed down. We also have a huge part of the private sector that are very wealthy that are also leaving the city because they don't want to live in it any longer. They don't feel safe. They can't stand the taxes, and they're tired of fighting. So you've got two distinct segments of the population that are splitting. A, where are you going to get the money to pay for all of this if all the rich people leave? And how are you going to get the poorer people who are leaving because they can't afford it? How are you going to get them to come back? I'm just curious about this because it seems to me like it's completely dysfunctional.
So
I think you're absolutely right.
And who wants to go first in this one?
I'll take that one. Look, both of those crises exist and they're related. Let's start with the fleeing of people with higher incomes, which we have seen now, and the data is now indisputable. We are losing our tax base. And look, the status quo is absolutely unacceptable. In healthcare, it's unacceptable. in a lot of areas unacceptable, but it's also unacceptable in government. It's not acceptable for the government to take so much tax money and do so little with it. People are not going to stay here if they don't think they're getting results, and if they're paying all that money in taxes, and the public schools are closed, closed for the most of the pandemic year, when they see the Catholic school system manage to stay open and educate people pretty well. I know so many parents who are strong public school supporters for whom that was such a disillusionment. Now, that means that we can't any longer have politics as usual, where Albany thinks, well, people have to be here, so we don't have to work to try and attract business and try and attract jobs. We have to make that a priority.
Andrew?
Well, look, there is a lot to unpack here. First off, the data on the wealthy leaving is actually not true. If you look at the actual tax data, some people leave and they're replaced immediately by other people who want to be here, because New York City is the capital of the world, and that's indisputable. New York City has always welcomed successive waves of people who are coming here to try to make it here. And when they do make it, they want to stay here. And, if you are a low income person, it is expensive to move. It is hard to leave New York City if you can't afford to live here. We have to acknowledge that fact as well. What we have here is multiple crises of affordability. We have a dire affordable housing crisis where people who are making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year cannot afford to live here. The starting salary for an EMT worker in New York City is $37,000. Where are they going to live when they're trying to respond to your 911 call? Starting salary for a teacher is in like the mid 60s. Where are they going to live when they're trying to start out their career educating the next generation? We have an affordable housing crisis. We have a healthcare affordability crisis. Why is it that some hospitals in New York City are going to charge you $500 for an MRI, and the hospital across the street is going to charge you $7,386 for the same MRI? That has no justification, no explanation. It's taking money out of people's pockets purely for greed. We have a childcare crisis in this state. Childcare is such an enormous expense. This is an economic development issue for working families who have to choose between a job or staying home to take care of their kids.
Right.
All of these crises intersect together, and we need leadership and we need solutions from Albany that are going to tackle these crises together and holistically. And that's what I've worked on, and that's what I'm going to continue to do.
Okay, so give me one good solution to one part of that.
Healthcare affordability. We need to crack down on runaway hospital costs that are driving money, that's taking money out of working people's pockets. There is no justification for why an MRI should be $7,000 plus at a hospital when the average cost in New York City is $500. That's why this year I passed the Hospital Equity and Affordability Law in partnership with the Coalition for Affordable Hospitals. And we are now waiting for Governor Hochul to sign that bill, which will start bending the cost curve on skyrocketing hospitalization costs. Every dollar a working person gets in a wage increase in this city, 57 to 63 cents of that dollar gets eaten up by increasing healthcare costs. That's not sustainable, and that is not right or fair.
I get a sense, I just want to put this in here and just change the subject a little bit. I know I didn't give it. I get a sense that the redistricting was made to create a Brooklyn waterfront district. It actually stretches all the way from Dumbo down to Bay Ridge. So if you were state senator, how would you break it up into different parts of the waterfront, or would you come up with a waterfront policy throughout the district? How would you treat the Brooklyn waterfront? Am I correct? It is along the waterfront, correct? From Dumbo all the way to Bay Ridge. So, David, firstly, how would you treat it?
Absolutely. It does cover that whole waterfront. When I chaired the waterfronts committee in the city council, I put out a plan for waterfronts throughout the city, and then was able to accomplish all the parts of it in the district I represented. So in North Brooklyn, we have housing and open space. We have 3 new parks that didn't exist before, and 3,000 units of affordable housing that didn't exist before. And along the Brooklyn Heights waterfront, we have a new park, the Brooklyn Bridge Park, that draws people from literally all over the city. I knew it would be true, but I figured one day I would just campaign there just to see what if it was true. And hardly anybody was from the district because people were there from all over. So yes. So we should move down the waterfront, the Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Red Hook waterfronts should be open space. And we can also put some housing further back off the water. But those should be open space too. Sunset Park, that is the opportunity for jobs. We're going to spend $8 billion over the next several years on offshore wind. We have already arranged for some of the work on those offshore wind turbines to be done here in New York City. Some of it at South Brooklyn Marine Terminal and Sunset Park.
Yeah, I thought we're going to be in Brooklyn. There's going to be
yes, and that can be. Project. It is an amazing project. I was one of the more satisfying things that I worked on over the last few years, and we can make that, frankly, the hub of the offshore wind industry for the whole Northeast.
Excuse me, and I want to give Andrew a chance, but it's very interesting to me that David, because he's from North Brooklyn, went north to south. Start with Bay Ridge going up north and south to north, Andrew.
I can start any way you want, Steve, because before I got elected to the state Senate, I worked at the borough president's office where I got to work with all Brooklyn neighborhoods and all Brooklyn communities from top to bottom, left to right, east, west, north, south. So I know Brooklyn like the back of my hand, every single corner of it. And this is a great waterfront district. You're absolutely right. It's a great district to take the ferry from Bay Ridge all the way up to Dumbo and back. And what we have to think about, our waterfront as a great resource. Not only is it an opportunity to supplement our public transportation system vis-a-vis the ferry, it's an enormous opportunity to create good paying jobs of the future. The green jobs revolution that's going to come in the next couple of years. It's not just limited to Sunset Park, and it's not just going to be limited to building wind turbines at the Army terminal. This is going to be a complete revolution and change how we transport goods in and out of New York City. We have a waterfront that has docks waiting to take packages and take freight off of ships, off of the trucks that are choking our neighborhoods, that are tearing up our streets, that are causing the BQE to collapse on itself. Why don't we use our waterfront and keep it as a working waterfront so that people have access to jobs, good paying jobs, green jobs, while also at the same time solving some of the other issues we have, like the proliferation of.
Sorry, just to clarify, which part of the Brooklyn waterfront do you see used for shipping?
I mean, we have a marine terminal in Red Hook, in case you forgot, David, that currently.
No, I know.
Hold on, though. Like, I get to finish my response. This is the second time you've interrupted me. But I didn't think you were like this, honestly. It's not what I expected.
All right, Andrew, you've been speaking.
So,
all right.
So we already have a port in Red Hook that currently docks ships and has cranes that removes freight from the ships and puts them on trucks. We have warehouses being built on the waterfront in Red Hook right now, last mile distribution centers. We have an opportunity to leverage the waterfront there to get the trucks that are going to fill those distribution centers, fill them from the water, not from truck traffic, and not to clog up our streets and further destroy our highways and roadways. So there is an enormous opportunity from north to south to use the waterfront in a way that creates jobs and that allows us to use the transportation system that the waterfront affords us, while also keeping communities and community assets like Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is a world-class asset for Brooklyn to have and for New York City to have. We can do it all.
Yep. Just to clarify, though, you can't use piers 7 through 12 both for shipping and for open space. I think they'd be much better used as open space. There are no containers that come in there. There is a handful of break bulk items that are unloaded there, but modern container ships can't fit in Red Hook, as I'm sure you know. So
I'm sure
I've been on those cranes. I know, and I've seen what. And by the way, much of that area is actually used as a giant truck parking lot. which I don't think is what the people who live in the neighborhood adjacent to that really want. So I guess I do disagree with you in terms of the best use for Piers 7 through 12 and the Cobble Hill Carroll Gardens waterfront.
Yeah, well, I moved into Dumbo before those parks were built along the waterfront right in Dumbo, and then going up, I guess it'd be south, right? And it was incredible once they actually were created and gave the community a place to actually take their children and have,
A quick yes or no, and just a yes or no. Do you think Industry City should be expanded or not as a tourism and light manufacturing hub? And
Yes.
yes,
Yep.
Dave, yes.
They still have a lot of underutilized space that hasn't been developed yet, so they don't need to at this point. So no.
Okay, thank you.
There you have it. We're getting a lot of comments on the chat that are talking about something that everybody wants addressed. What about rising property taxes for small homeowners? How can Albany help with this as property values rise and impact people being able to stay in their homes? Answer?
Andrew first.
Well, this is an issue that gets to the affordability crisis that I highlighted earlier. And we know that outer borough neighborhoods are particularly hard hit by a broken property tax system. This is a focus that I've been working on in Albany since I got there in 2019. It's like the third rail of New York State politics. There's no reason why a brownstone in a rich part of Brooklyn should be worth 3 times the value of a home in Bath Beach or Dyker Heights, and yet pay 1/3 the property taxes on that. Doesn't make any sense. We need comprehensive property tax reform so that everyone is able to pay their fair share in order to make sure that we can fully fund the city services that we need. I proposed multiple pieces of legislation on this, including the Truth in Budgeting Act, which would require the city to hold a public hearing every time they increase the overall property tax levy by more than 2%, because what the city does, they never change your property tax rates, but they manipulate your property tax assessments. And that's why over the last decade, property taxes have increased by about $35 billion, all while the rates have stayed exactly the same and the valuations have been wildly fluctuating.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, well, here's an area of agreement. I also support the 2% cap, applying that to New York City the way other parts of New York State have it. Property taxes, when the city raises people's property taxes either on its face or, as Andrew points out, in a kind of more hard to figure out way, it means that people who have been living in a home for decades, but have the same means that they had at the beginning of those decades, are forced out. And the property tax system has so many irrationalities in it. It should be start from scratch almost.
Well, and that is something that is crucially important to affordability, to people being able to remain in their homes. And I think it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed as soon as you possibly can. So will you make that promise to both of you that that's what you're going to do?
Yes.
I've already started. I'm going to continue fighting for property tax reform. Absolutely.
Okay. We are just about out of time. I know we started a little bit late, but I want to give both of you time for your closing statement. So let's start with you, Andrew. 2 minutes.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jane, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, David. And thank you, everyone who tuned in tonight. It's really important that you're paying attention and that you care about what happens in your neighborhood, that you're going to watch a debate like this. I'm asking for your vote to be reelected to the state Senate to represent the district that I live in, that I was born in, that I spent nearly my entire life living in and working in and serving in. I think that my record of accomplishments over the last 4 years, passing more than 60 bills into law on things like street safety, pedestrian safety, transit accessibility, CUNY affordability, dismantling the laws that protect abusers of sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace, and so much more, speaks for itself. I'm a committed person who understands how Albany works and how it doesn't work and knows how to make sure that I can deliver for my neighborhoods. I'm proud of the work that I've done in Albany over the last 4 years. I'm proud of the fact that I was able to deliver Reproductive Health Act, the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act. We were able to deliver strong gun laws, the single biggest increase in CUNY funding in more than a decade, and so much more. And I ask for your vote to continue this work, to be able to deliver for the working families of this community, this borough, this city, and this state. I'm proud of the endorsements and the support I've earned throughout this campaign, starting with the Working Families Party, Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez, Brad Lander, Lincoln Ressler, Justin Brennan, and so many of my allies in organized labor who know that I'm going to put working people first, as I've always done. And so with that, I thank you all for joining us tonight. I humbly ask for your vote. Early voting starts August 13th. If you have any questions or want more information about my record or my positions, please just visit my website at andrewgounardes.com. Thank you so much and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
David.
Well, thank you. And yes, again, thank you, Jane and Steve, and thank you to Schneps for organizing this. I have been representing and working for the neighborhoods in the 26th district for decades. I represented much of it in the city council for 8 years and delivered on everything from streetlights at the dangerous intersections like Hicks and Pierpont, to the local schools, to getting rid of the transfer stations that were spewing pollution from all the trucks. And I delivered on the big policy items. And that is where I think there's a difference between the candidates. Not just, I didn't simply, sign my name on somebody else's bill and vote for them. I pushed forward affordable housing restrictions in the zoning law when the whole real estate industry fought against it and the mayor was against it. I pushed for a change in the way the city gets rid of garbage when the city council speaker was against it. If you are happy with the way that Albany's working and you think Albany is doing a great job for you, you can vote for the senator who currently represents the Bay Ridge part of this district. But if you think that we need change in Albany, if you think that we need creativity, innovation, you think we need somebody who knows these neighborhoods inside and out to face challenges like we have not faced before, because the era of remote work isn't going to be like the last 20 years. If you think that that's what we need in Albany, I ask for your vote, and I will work my heart out for you in Albany as your state senator. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for joining us. And Stephen, as usual, great job with the timing and the questions.
Nice try.
Yeah. And I want to remind everybody, again, the primary is August 23rd. You can begin voting August 13th. And so make sure you cast it because it's very important. It's important to do your civic duty, and it's important for the future of this state and the city that you do. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow, or actually at 9 o'clock tonight with another debate. I'm Jane Hanson. Thank you so much for joining us and good evening.